Hi, so I came here to talk about an interesting topic that is really, really close to my heart because I'm kind of an educator. I started out at the university and I've been teaching classes. And then after that, when I decided to switch jobs into the industry as a developer, I still went back to the university and taught classes. And I also have like workshops every now and then where I teach people about interesting stuff like how to code well, right? So yeah, it was an interesting period in the company's timeline because we were growing really, really fast, and we realized that as we were growing, more and more people were didn't have the knowledge of how to do extreme programming at Emarsys. So we wanted to change that. So we started the bootcamp. And I know what you're thinking. Probably I'm like this guy. And no, that's not how I treat our new hires. I'm a pretty nice guy. But yeah, I actually started. Sorry, I actually started working with the new hires, and the way we did this is whenever we hired someone new, they would start in the bootcamp team, and after about 2 months, they would move on to their final teams. So this talk will have 3 parts. The first part is why did we start a project like this? Why did we start the bootcamp? Then I'm going to talk about how we did it, what are the practices that we used during the bootcamp, and finally, I'm going to tell you what kind of results we had with this approach, okay? So let's start with the why. Why would you want to create a separate bootcamp team within your company? Well, I work at Emarsys, and Emarsys is e-marketing platform. It's designed for marketeers, and it's a cloud-based software. And that's not really important. What's important is that this company was started in 2001, and by 2011, the development team was pretty much stuck. They couldn't deploy a new version during a 1.5-year period, because every time they tried to deploy it, they had to roll back because they had so many bugs. So they essentially coded themselves into a dead end, right? They couldn't get out of it. And then 2 guys from Hungary were hired in 2011. And what you have to know about these 2 people is that they are extreme programming experts. They are really good at extreme programming. Do you know what extreme programming is? Show of hands, who knows what extreme programming is? Okay, for those of you who don't know, it's this. No, so no, extreme programming is not that. Extreme programming is an agile methodology. Scrum is actually part of extreme programming, but it's a much broader thing. It has a lot of practices that are not part of Scrum, and these practices are very specific to programming. So what you have to realize about Scrum is that it's stripped down to the bare minimum so that managers can understand it. But if you want to do Scrum really well, then you actually have to do extreme programming. That's what I think about this. And actually, it's not just me. I have been to talk by Mike Cohn, who is one of the creators of Scrum, and that's exactly what he said, that he introduces Scrum for every team, and then gradually adds the practices from extreme programming until basically the team is doing extreme programming. So yeah, we actually use extreme programming, and we do it from first principles, not just like blindly following the rules. We always question why we do things, and I think that's really important. So the thing is that when you come to Emarsys, you might find a lot of our practices really weird or unusual. For example, pair coding is not something that most people use. Or or the idea that we do not use branches might be weird for people, or the idea that we deploy several times a day might be something new for people. And because we have all these things that are out of the ordinary, at least in Hungary, we actually have to teach people. And for a while, when we were growing at a nice steady pace and wasn't too quick, we could do it. But after a while, we would fill up spaces like this every half a year. We would double the number of developers on our team every 1.5 years, which is huge. You have to teach people to work with these very specific practices within a 1.5 year period, or actually even less, like within 3 or 4 months, because what you want to do is you want to split up teams and then create new teams from them. So what we realized that after a while, simply a lot of the developers didn't have the knowledge about the practices that make the Budapest office successful. Now, there were other problems as well. Velocity was a huge problem, because when you put a new person in a team, then that team doesn't get faster, not immediately. First, it gets slower. So this is one of the things that's quite counterintuitive for the managers, that when a project is late, you might feel like you want to add people. That's the worst thing you can do. If your project is late, you do not add people, because then it will be even more late, because that person has to be onboarded. So there was this problem with our velocity. We couldn't predict how fast each team will move, because whenever we put in a person there, then we slow down and then speed up again. We didn't have a steady pace. Second is that, I have already touched on this, but we have our practices, our habits. And you know who this guy is? Shout out if you know. Okay, this is Ken Beck. Ken Beck is known for 2 things. One is test-driven development, and the other one is extreme programming. And this is something he said: I'm not a great programmer, I'm just a good programmer with great habits. And I really like this quote, because I think that like 70% of how good a programmer comes down to their habits. And habits are really important. And if you want to know how important habits are, there is this book, The Power of Habit. It's all about how you can shape your habits, and all about how powerful they are. And basically in the book, he talks about 3 kinds of habits: habits of individuals, habits of organizations, and habits of societies. And the important part for us is habits of organizations. We want to shape the habits of an organization, because if you have the wrong company culture, if you don't have a company culture, you actually have some kind of company culture, it's just not controlled what it is. And probably it's going to be a bad company culture. So it's really important to shape our habits as an organization. And that's what we wanted to focus on. We want to make sure that those habits that actually added to the success of the company are kept. And finally, the third problem that we faced was courage. When people joined the company, they would face this huge legacy code base, which is our core application, and some nice little microservices around it. So obviously, we are one of those companies who had a monolith and then started to break it down into microservices. But it's a process. It's a transition from monolith to microservice architecture. So for now, we have both this large monolith, this legacy PHP code base, and let me tell you, as far as legacy goes, PHP legacy is probably the worst. So they would come into the company and they would start working on their nice little microservices, and then every now and then when they had to integrate into the core application, they would see, wow, something they didn't dare touch. Okay, so we wanted to make sure that the developers that we hire have the knowledge and the practice to just modify anything in our core application. So this concludes the first part, why we started it. Now the next question is, so just to sum it up, we wanted to have a more stable velocity. We wanted to make sure that our company or organizational habits are protected against the huge growth that we were going through. And finally, we wanted to make sure that our developers have courage to modify our legacy application. So how do we do it? How do you start a project like that? Well, first of all, our VP of engineering wrote a manifesto, which was really nice and long, and nobody read it except for me. But at least it gave us a direction. We could go back to that manifesto and check if the goals that we wanted to achieve are being met. Then so one of the things in the manifesto was that the Bootcamp team is a team. It is working on a project just like any other team. The only difference is that the primary goal is not to finish the project, or not necessarily to finish the project on time, but to educate people on the team. So one of the early decisions we made was if an iteration failed, for example, it was perfectly okay to roll back an entire week worth of code and say that we are going to do that week again. Because if something went wrong, we want to learn from that, okay? So this is the kind of tiny cognitive changes that you have to make when you do a bootcamp team, is that the primary goal is not to finish the project. The primary goal is to make sure that people learn, okay? So this was actually one of the projects that we did. This is so yeah, another important aspect was that we didn't want to use a critical project for this, right? Because we knew that it might not finish on time. So we wanted to find something that is useful, but doesn't kill the company if it's not ready on time. So we actually created a dashboard for our meeting rooms so that people can easily book meeting rooms. This is like an internal thing. If it's not finished, it's okay. People have used meeting rooms before. So that was like a good candidate for this kind of stuff. Now, we also realized that there is multiple ways of learning. And one of the ways is like working on a project and learning things along the way. But the other thing is that you can read and you can watch videos and you can learn from other people, even outside of the company. So one of the things that we also did was to create a personal backlog for every new hire. This was the same backlog for everyone, but they had to go through it individually. And the rule was to spend 20% of your time on this backlog, finishing this backlog in the 2-month period while the person is in the bootcamp. But everyone could go on their own time, right? So we have interesting things here like watching YouTube videos. I actually have a really nice playlist on YouTube with interesting talks from Bob Martin and people like that. And also like taking part in agile retrospective, stuff like that. So that was kind of an important part. Also, we wanted to make sure that people get a lot of feedback. Because when you're learning, it's even more important to find out if you have learned something or if you still have to work on that particular aspect of your work. So I wanted to make sure that we have feedback. And basically, there were two main ways I would give feedback, or rather how people would receive feedback. One was every week I would meet one-on-one with every developer in the bootcamp team. And one of the things that we did on those weekly meetings was just to look at this backlog. Where are you and what's the next step for you? But I also gave feedback on their work. So that was one thing that we did every week. First, I was scheduling each one-on-one separately, but soon I realized that that way my time was split up too much. So eventually I would just say that every Wednesday afternoon there is this 3-hour time slot, and I'm going to do the one-on-ones one after the other in one block. It was exhausting, but at least I was done with it within a few hours. So that was something I changed along the way. All right, so that's feedback. Next thing, so one of the other things that was on the backlog is doing a talk to the other members of the bootcamp. So what you see there is Christian is standing there, he's doing a talk. He was talking about some coding-related stuff, I don't remember what. And then we have the other new hires in the bootcamp listening to it. So this was really useful because they had to prepare something, right? And just practice speaking. First, we had they had to do 3 different presentations, but that was too much. It was too much preparing. It was too much tension on the members of the bootcamp. So eventually, we decided that they have to do one presentation for everyone. That was enough, and it wasn't too much of a hassle for our developers. Next thing, yeah, so we also do retrospectives like any other team, and also demos. But one of the things that we did was that the retrospectives weren't facilitated by me, usually. One of the items of the personal backlog was to facilitate one of the retrospectives. So everyone in the team had to do one retrospective and one demo themselves. So basically, that made sure that they have a quite strong grip on what these agile practices mean. We had stand-ups like any other Scrum team, but instead of having one stand-up a day, we had 2. The reason for that is that pretty early on I realized that the stand-ups are a really great opportunity to give feedback and a really great opportunity to find out what kinds of problems or my bootcampees are facing. So that was the time when I asked, okay, why are you stuck here? What could be done differently? And then we talked through it together. So that was really useful to do 2 stand-ups a day. We also had code reviews. I personally don't believe in code reviews, not in general. So if you are just working on a project and you do code reviews instead of pair coding, I don't approve that. Primarily because I don't think that code reviews are good for finding mistakes. It gives you a false sense of security that someone else will actually look at your code. But there is one thing that code reviews are great for, and that is finding out if there is a better solution for a certain problem. If architecturally you made the right decisions, if your code is readable, that's the part where it's useful. But you have to be very clear on what your goal is with a code review. Because if your goal with the code review is to make sure that the other developer didn't make a mistake, you're on the wrong track. Because that person spent hours understanding the context, and you are just looking at a part of the code. You will never find a mistake. Never. Most of the time I see code review comments in GitHub, I see looks good to me. And that's the best thing I see. At least 80% of the time, it just looks good to me. That's not a good practice then. So here we actually looked at the code with the eye that we wanted to improve the code. We actually did refactoring sometimes during the code reviews. And it's really important to make sure that we understand the difference between trying to find a mistake and trying to just make the code look better. We, of course, did pair programming. Most of the time, pairs were made up of two bootcamp members. And one thing that I tried in the beginning was to sit down with everyone every week. That didn't work because I just didn't have enough time to get through all people. So then I realized that I actually put on the backlog that they have to code with me once, because I wanted to see them code. And it usually was like at the end of their tenure in the bootcamp. But what I did instead of just pair coding with people, I would just join as a third wheel. I would just go there, look at what they're doing, spend like 10 to 20 minutes there, and then move on to the next pair. That way I could share my time better between the people. Okay, so that's like a little trick that you can use. Then we also had mob programming sessions. Who knows what is mob programming? Okay, so this is a very interesting practice. So, I wish I remembered the name of the guy who came up with it. Anyway, so this guy said, okay, so pair programming is working better than programming on your own. And then at some point where they had an issue with the code and they had to finish something quickly, he came up with the idea to get the whole team together, and they were working on the single code base or single task, 4 of them. Like, not even 2 or 3, they were 4 or 5 of them working on the same piece of code. And that's what he calls mob programming. Now, the interesting thing about mob programming is that it sounds really, really wasteful. And in many cases, it is. But in some cases, it's a great tool as well. Although there are teams who do mob programming all the time, if you actually search on YouTube for mob programming session, you will find like these time lapses where they have 2 huge screens, and then like a bunch of people are sitting in front of those screens, and they work together. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm pretty sure it works in some contexts. What I'm saying is that for me, it seems wasteful to do it all the time. But when, for example, one of the situations where I used mob programming outside of Bootcamp. In Bootcamp, it was a different story because there it's a great educational tool. We just look at the code together, and then we can find out what's the best solution. Everyone can chip in, and also I could have a better control over what's happening in the code base. But outside of Bootcamp, when I just had one of these teams before the Bootcamp times, and what happened was that we hired 2 new people onto the team, and like half of the team had little understanding of the code base. And like 3 or 4 months later, we ran into some pretty big issues. We had like catastrophic failures, really like priority 1 errors where you have to wake up at night and work even at night to fix it. And what we realized that the new people didn't have enough domain knowledge to work alone. So what I did was to say, all right, we are going to do mob programming for the next 2 weeks. And we are going to go through the entire code base because we had a task anyway that was touching on multiple parts of the code base. And we are going to do that as a mob. And after like 2 weeks of doing that, they were on board. That 2 weeks meant more than the 3 months before that. In that 2 weeks, while we were mob coding, they learned every single little screw in the system. So this is something to think about. If you have people who, new people on the team who are not very familiar with the code base, and you want to make sure that they get familiar with it, mob coding is one option. And yeah, and one of the things that happened was that my boss walked up to me after like 3 days, and he said, what are you doing in that meeting room together all day long? And I said, well, we are mob coding. Why are you doing that? That's wasteful. I said, yeah, just give me like 2 weeks, and you will see the results. And then, of course, this discussion was much longer, and it was much harder to convince him, but eventually I convinced him, and it turns out that it worked. But yeah, you might expect some backlash from management. But if you can reason around it, then it can work. Okay. Finally, one of the things that was also on the backlog is that they had to join another team for a week. Actually, I think there were two such items, and they had to work with another team and then bring that knowledge back to the boot camp. This is something we call rotation, and actually people are rotated every 3 months to at least once per week to another team, so that we have like this cross-team communication within the company. Okay. If you have a high turnover rate in a team, that's going to have impact on many things. Like, for example, the code quality wasn't as good as I hoped it would be, but we did our best to improve it. So it's just something that you have to be aware of, that this is a team, and if you put that kind of strain on a team, that there is this high turnover rate within the team, it's going to have impact on the team. So just to sum it up, the bootcamp team is working on a project just like any other team. There is an onboarding backlog for every single member that they have to go through on their own time. And finally, we do more extreme programming. Just do extreme programming and take it even more seriously than you would usually. Okay, so that's the basic concept. So what are the results? Because, I mean, if you think about it, operating a bootcamp is expensive. We had 8 people in the bootcamp, like all the time. That was like most of the time 8 new hires and 1 team lead. If you calculate the amount of money that was burnt on this, it's huge. It's a lot of money. So it better have results. And yeah, I mean, we had results. These people have all gone through bootcamp except for me. But this is actually about just a half or third of the people who were in the bootcamp until now. But these people have, once they left the bootcamp, they were pretty successful in their teams. And what happened to our goals? What happened to velocity? Well, the good news is that the velocity got much better. It's still not steady. There is still some fluctuation because teams still have to take part in hiring, and they still have issues sometimes. But it got much more stable. And the cycle just after we started the bootcamp was a major success, because we didn't have those fluctuations. Product management had a clear view of how far the teams will get, and we didn't have this scramble at the end of the cycle. Oh my God, this is not ready, that is ready, and we didn't expect that to be ready, stuff like that. So it made things much easier to predict. How about habits? Now this is the part where we absolutely had success. Or new hires who went through bootcamp have adopted most of the habits. And what was a super, okay, so one thing that was the hardest for everyone was learning test-driven development. So that was always the last thing that people got used to. But other than that, it was a major success. It was such a success that our new hires, when they went back to the team that they were hired to, they became like ambassadors of the habits that we were teaching them. They would call out the team that, hey, this is not how we did this in bootcamp. Why are you doing this differently? And then most of the time it would turn out that they just forgot that they should do that differently. So basically, not only did we manage to stop the erosion of our culture, we could actually start building back the things that have already eroded away. So this is great. I mean, that's the part that I'm most happy about. I'm the most proud of, that they became such ambassadors. One other thing that was pretty unexpected result. And I'm telling this because I didn't expect this to happen. It was just something like a side effect. So who knows about unconscious bias? Like, yeah, one person. Okay, so, or two person, yeah. So there is this notion that all of us are biased in some way. And the weird thing is that even if you are part of a minority, you might have the same biases against that minority. And what I realized was, so I'm like the person who likes to look out for these things and call out people on their biases. And my goal is not to shame people. My goal is to make them notice that they made something weird. So I want to play a game with you, and I really want you to participate in this. I just want to show you what unconscious bias looks like. So there is two words on the corners, male and female. And what you have to do is I will show you words, and you have to put your hands up on the, yeah, it's the left hand if you think that word is related to males, and your right hand if it's related to females. So just one example. Husband, is it a male or a female? Okay, put your hands up. Right, okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this go. It will show you a word every 1.5 seconds, so you have to be pretty quick. And you have to put your hands up, wait until the next word comes, and then switch if you need to. Okay? Ready? All right. Why isn't it coming? I'm sorry. Just a second. I have to refresh because, yeah, the JavaScript didn't work here. Okay? Let me try again. Come on. Okay? Okay, now. Okay, pretty hard, right? But let's do this again. But this time, we will have liberal arts and science. So left hand is liberal arts, right hand is science. Okay, 2 more to go. The next one, we are going to mix things up, okay? So you will have females and liberal arts on the left hand, and science and males on the right hand, okay? Let's see. Okay, and the final one, I'm going to turn things around. So we will have male and liberal arts on the left hand, and females and science on the right hand. Okay, so which one was the hardest? Yeah, exactly. For most people, this is the hardest. And there are exceptions, by the way, and I am the exception because for me, the one before the last one is the hardest. And the reason for that is because my father is a painter and my mother is a mathematician. So I was socialized in an environment where the female was the scientist and the male was the painter, okay? That's an interesting thing, how much effect this has on your brain, right? So here's the thing. I saw a lot of confused hands, right? So this is nothing bad. This is called unconscious bias, and the reason it's called unconscious bias is because you don't know it's there. But you can start looking for it, right? And it doesn't make you any worse person. It's just that way that you have been socialized. But we can fight it, and that's great. And if you have like this thing in your mind, then it's helpful. Now, the reason I'm telling you all of this, and this is actually called a implicit association test. And if you want to look into it, if you look for implicit association tests on the internet, you will find a bunch of these, not just for gender roles, but also for race and stuff like that. But my point is not that. My point is that, where was I? Yeah. So the reason I wanted to show you this is that people who make biased choices or do biased things are not bad people. This is really important. They are not necessarily horrible people. They just don't realize it's unconscious. And what happened was that in one of the meetings, there was a female developer on the team at the time. And at one of the meetings, I realized that she would come up with an idea. And then everyone was ignoring it. And then like 30 seconds later, one of the guys come up with the same idea. And, oh my God, you're a genius. And it was like, hey, it was that girl who said that first. And then I called them out on that. And they were like, at first they were like, what? And then they realized that I was right. And just noticing this and then calling people out on it can help them change their behavior. The next planning, that same thing wasn't around anymore. The girl would come up with an idea and she would get the credit, which is great. Just this one act of landing privilege, and this is called landing privileges, that's the term. When someone with privilege, like me with my white male privilege, would land that privilege to a female developer and make sure that the other people notice her, right? And if you want to know more about this, there is a talk with this title, Landing Privilege. It was both on QCon and CraftConf. You can look it up. It's a really, really nice talk about how you can lend privilege to others. Okay. So that was an interesting thing. And then what happened was that I called them out on this. It changed the behavior within the team. And then this behavior spread into other parts of the company. So basically, I could like inject this kind of behavior into the company culture. Okay. So next thing I wanted to talk about is the monkey experiment. How many of you know the monkey and banana experiment? Okay, so then I'm going to tell you about it. So the experiment goes like this. You put 4 monkeys into a cage, and you hang a banana on the top of the cage, and there is a ladder from which the monkey can reach the banana. If they go for the banana, they get drenched with cold water, with lots of cold water, and they don't really reach the banana anyway. So pretty soon, the monkeys are going to learn that that banana is not for us. They are not going to go for the banana. When that happens, you just take one monkey, take it out of the cage, and put another monkey in. And that another monkey will go for the banana, because monkeys. So it goes for the banana, but what happens is really interesting. The other monkeys don't want to get the cold water on their necks, so they will just grab that monkey and beat it up. And that monkey will learn that that banana is not for me. And then you go on, and once that monkey learned that that banana is not for us, you take out another monkey and put another one in. And then they beat him up. And slowly, you switch all of the monkeys. So by iteration 5, you have 4 monkeys, none of which ever saw cold water, but none of which will reach for the banana. And if a new monkey comes in, they will beat it up. That's an interesting story. Now, the really interesting part is that like a good dozen people have told me this story, and it turns out that this experiment has never been done. But there was a similar experiment done. You can look for it in YouTube, where they, I don't remember the title of the YouTube video, but the point was that a person was waiting for the doctor's appointment, and then they had to stand up when beep sound came on. And that actually happened with the people in the waiting room. So Yeah, we are social creatures, and we don't want to like be ashamed by not doing what other people do. Why is this important? The reason this is important is our branching policy, because we have a strong policy of not using any branches. We commit everything into mainline, and there is a reason for that. And the reason is that we want to make sure that we are really actually continuously integrating our code, and there are no merges. There are no points in time where you have to put things together that have been worked on for days or weeks. So that was the goal. We wanted to make sure that people commit into mainline every hour or so, okay? And then I explained this. I did a little presentation on why this is important, and the people on the bootcamp understand that, and then they start using a single branch. And then one developer goes, one comes. Another one goes, another one comes. 2 months later, everyone's still using a single branch. That's good, right? What I didn't find really amusing was that when I found out they were sending patches to each other in emails. That completely defeats the whole policy, right? That's like working around a policy that we didn't understand. And I think this is exactly the monkey's example, because they learned that the banana is not for us. We don't use branches, but they don't know why. And that's really important. So, moral of the story, if you are doing a bootcamp like this, make sure that people still understand the practices that you use. Don't just assume that that knowledge was passed on. And how about courage? Did we get more courageous developers? And yes and no. In certain areas, they got more courageous. But as far as committing into mainline or the core legacy application, well, I didn't reach the goals that I was setting for myself, but they were more willing to than previously. They still ask for help from other more experienced developers, but at least they don't get entirely stuck, okay? So that's good news. So to just sum up, velocity got more stable. That's great. Our biggest achievement was around habit adoption. That was like not just adopting habits, it was also an injection point for cultural changes, and it was also a place where we could reverse the erosion of our culture. Finally, our new hires did have more courage, although this is the only goal that I feel I haven't achieved entirely. But I think it was unrealistic what I was setting myself up for, so it did go well. So just to sum up, for us, Bootcamp was a great solution. It might not be for you. This is very context dependent. We were growing really fast and we had a strong culture. If you don't have a strong culture, Bootcamp isn't going to help you. First, you need a good culture. If you are not growing at this really fast pace, then Bootcamp is going to be a waste of money for you. This is only worth it if you are growing really, really fast and if you have a very strong culture that you have to protect, okay? This is important. But if you have this context, if you have a company culture that you want to protect, or even more specifically, if you have an engineering culture you want to protect, then this is a way to go during hypergrowth. Finally, I want to say thank you to our VP of Engineering and VP of Operations, who have been a huge help in creating the bootcamp. Actually, the first 2 months, the bootcamp was led by Zoltan, who left being VP of Operations for this. And after that, I took over. And the VP of Engineering was great help in creating the manifesto and all that. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. How did I find out of the patches? Well, so I don't exactly remember, but it was something like, oh yeah, I remember. They realized that they can also use Slack for that. and they used the Bootcamp Slack channel. And I was like, what is this patch? Well, we were sending it in email, and now we realize that Slack is a better platform for sending patches. I was like, no, it's not. So it was like that. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let me just give you a broader perspective. So this company, the Budapest office, which we are talking about, the company was founded in 2001 in Vienna. The Budapest office started in 2011. That was right after they couldn't release for such a long time. And they started with 4 people. When I joined a year later, we were about a dozen people. And then when the bootcamp started, we were about 70. And by now, we have, I think, about over 200 people in the Budapest office. So it's a pretty high growth rate. Any other questions? Do we have time left, by the way? Yeah? Okay. Okay, so if you don't have questions, I actually have something that I thought I might add to all this. And that's really important as well, I think. And that's how the way you hire people. Because if you do the right hiring, then bootcamp can be a lot more effective. And one of the things that I think was a very important innovation at Emarsys, and I would really like to advocate for other companies to adopt this practice, is that of assessment days. So if you want to work at Emarsys, you don't just go through interviews. You actually have like one interview with an HR person and then one technical interview, and then it would end up on 3 days of assessment. So you take some vacation and come to work with us for 3 days. You actually get paid for that, which is just fair, right? And this is important for 2 reasons. One, the person who would like to be working at Emarsys gets a view of what it's like to work with us. So no one just comes on their first day and finds out that we are assholes, right? We are not, by the way. But it's really important that they understand or have a feel of what it's like to work with us, because some people don't like the way we work. Some people love it. But if you come and actually get like a taste of what's going to happen once you work there, you can be much more committed to switching jobs. And it is actually one of the things that surprised us when we started this, is that only in the last 3 or 4 years since we started this, only 2 people said that they are not willing to do assessment days. And we were like, okay, then no. But all of the other people were actually happy that they could try it out. And there were multiple people who just came to do interviews with us to test their value on the market. They didn't really want to change jobs. That happens sometimes. Actually, you should do that. You should always, every 1 year, go for a few interviews just so that you know where you are at and what kind of salary you could make at other companies. But the thing is that multiple people who came to our assessment days, despite not really wanting to switch jobs, after those 3 days, decided to switch their jobs anyway because they liked it so much at Emarsys. So this is like a really good way of making sure that there is a real match between the team and the hired person. So yeah, that I think is a really important aspect of how we work, because everyone who was coming into bootcamp already had a really clear view of what they can expect. Anything else? Any questions? Well, if no more questions, then thank you for your attention, and see you around.